Yes, I do believe we do. It keeps jumping around on my screen.
I believe we would have to have a
We have
quorum.
11, I think.
All right. Being that we have a quorum, we'll call the meeting to order. May 18th, 2022, meeting of the advisory committee to the 109 board. The first order of business is the approval of the April 20th, 2022 minutes. Has everyone had the opportunity to review the advisory committee meeting minutes from April 20th?
Yep.
So moved.
Are there any corrections, modifications to the minutes required? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A motion by, I believe I heard Pat Stollard,
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
and do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Greg.
Any additional discussion required? Hearing none, and please verbally or raise your hand to vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is our primary topic. And as directed by the 109 board, our sole topic for these committee meetings is the review of the 5-year solid waste management plan. And with that, I believe I'll turn it over to either Karen or Pete to guide us down the roadmap.
Okay, I think you're going to get Pete at least initially. The first thing I'd want to start off with is to say what this is and what this is not. This is a draft of a breakout section of the 5-year solid waste management plan. It's been taken from the actual document and placed in a regular Word document because of formatting with the original state plan. It just makes it easier. It is just a few of those questions that really kind of pertain to what we can truly answer on. And the first part of it is for us to describe our collection system. So it's kind of like the as is. And that is a pretty large section of what you see. It would go down to actually midway through page 5. So that's the description of the system. The next part is to describe the strengths of the collection system. And last is the weaknesses of the collection system. The staff has put this together as a starting point. And what I would say is that I don't know, because our collection system is fairly complex, I'm sure there are things that we have missed, things that could be better. And that's why we're here. So I have received an email from somebody that couldn't be here tonight, given some concerns as well. So with that said, I'm hoping that everybody had a chance to read over the document before tonight's meeting. It should make it go easier if we have done so. And, you know, my first question would be, the first part of this is this the as is? Is this the collection system as we know it? And, you know, there's different facets, different groups, different perspectives of what the as is really is. So I just want to start off by having a discussion saying, does everybody raise a hand if it's perfect? Okay. That was pretty much a settled situation before we even asked the question. So I guess at this point, if we want to go down section by section, that's what we need to do. If that's okay with the with the committee, Bruce.
I think that's the way we should proceed.
Okay. So I think, Karen, would you like to share your screen? Because if there's edits that we would want to make, I think Karen's a lot faster at doing that than I am. And better at it. So the first part is the residential collection system. And what I really wanted to do here was kind of break out the system into the different parts. So this is the residential collection system, all county. And what I'm saying, I do take a lot of this stuff from the 10-year study and the way that they kind of viewed looking from the outside in. We do have a complex system, got general rules. First paragraph, second paragraph is the general solid waste management area collection rules. So these are actually codified sections of the ordinance. Does anybody have any concerns about those two sections? Excellent. The next one goes into residential municipal organized collection. And I'm using organized, unorganized, trying to differentiate the different styles of collection that takes place in our solid waste management areas. So residential municipal, is there any concerns or questions about those sections? Sarah Lynn?
I think the terms organized and unorganized aren't particularly illustrative, and that we can probably come up with something better and maybe simply leave. I mean, what's the difference between contraction and subscription? Can't we instead just say residential incorporated areas, residential unincorporated? Wouldn't that be more helpful to the reader?
Organized and unorganized is I guess a description that you'll see in different papers, different things in the industry trying to describe the different systems. The unorganized, meaning that really I think organized and unorganized is the best way to describe it, because there is a difference. That is the difference. I think if you use incorporated versus unincorporated, it doesn't really tell you anything about the system of collection there. Unorganized meaning you got up to 5 haulers on the same street. It's subscription-based service versus a contracted area where you have one service hauling in that one area, which I think is a pretty big difference.
I do too. What if you said something like organized area versus unorganized independent, or unorganized multiple, or just something to make it more meaningful? Because I just think it's fairly unique, and those terms aren't that helpful.
And actually, if you even just did a definition of what you mean by them, I understand why you've done it and it makes sense. But I agree with Sarah Lynn that the reader doesn't, we all know that we've got a very complex system, and you've said that, and it wouldn't hurt to have a couple more sentences to go forward with that concept.
Understood.
And the
And I
other
agree.
reason to do it is unorganized sounds or could be interpreted as disrespectful, and we don't mean that.
No, but it's a good point. I think we will, while we might not make that edit here tonight, we will come back and put a description in there for each of those. I think it would be very helpful too. Thank you. Any other concerns about the municipal section, residential municipal section? Residential.
I had one note on that first section that I don't know if it's meaningful or not, but Karen, could you go back up to that first 2 paragraphs? We have some customers, and others do as well, that have very few, if any, trees and they put their grass clippings on their yard. So technically, they do not have a yard waste collection. Is that something we should address in that first paragraph, or is that not necessary?
Can you point out exactly what section that you're referring to, Brian?
Yeah, it's the, I'm sorry. It's in that, let's see. Keep going, Karen, in that very first thing we started with, those very first two paragraphs. And I'm sorry, I had that marked. I should have said something. Where it says in the third sentence, fourth sentence, at least seasonal collection of yard waste. There are those clients that do not have yard waste collection because they put their grass clippings on their yard. I don't know if that's significant to that paragraph or not, but I was gonna bring that up.
Well, what I would say there is that what we're describing is chapter 51.300
Yeah,
as a minimum standard.
Yeah.
And it just says that it has to be offered by the waste collection system. It doesn't keep somebody. In fact, I would applaud anybody that's keeping the grass clippings on their lawn because I think that's the best way to do it.
yeah, you answered my question. I just had that marked on my draft.
Understood. So you're good with it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anything else on the municipal section? Okay, residential contracted, which is organized, and knowing that we need to do a definition of the organized.
Well, and of the unorganized.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
I'll tell you, this was probably one of the tougher sections because we've got 82 small cities that's capable of having something in writing as far as ordinance goes. And we have HOA contracts. So I had to try to describe it without being too specific because I mean, we can go into each one of those and be just way too long. So I hope that I've adequately captured what goes on in those organized and contracted areas.
What if
And
we
if
call it
everybody's,
unorganized ad hoc? That
sorry,
to,
Sarah, could you say again?
what if we called unorganized ad hoc? Is Latin to fancy pants?
I don't know that it helps.
Because that's what it is. It's letting people do whatever they want.
Right. Okay. The next section is residential subscription. Wow, this is going way better than I thought. Residential education and outreach for waste collection, all county.
Pete, just real quick, sorry. The principles is the wrong version of principles in the open
just
market
already
section there.
marked it
Oh,
up
sorry,
for
sorry,
him.
Sarah Lynn. So-
It's okay. It's
yeah.
okay.
Where is it? I can change it now.
It's
First
the
word of the
first
last line of
line,
residential
first
subscription.
paragraph. Yep.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, on to the education and outreach for waste collection, all county. All good. Commercial collection system, unorganized.
So I have a question about the second sentence. I'm trying to imagine, have I seen a compactor without a dumpster attached? And I'm not sure. This reads as if you have a compactor that I assume would disgorge into the tractor trailer or whatever that picks it up. Or should it be corrected to say large capacity dumpsters with or without compactors, or some with compactors?
I think that would be a good change.
Okay.
Anything else?
Pete, what is the definition of unorganized commercial collection system? What is the definition of that?
You know, I've kind of struggled with that a little bit, Brian, and trying to come up with that. To me, it's kind of like the hopeful definition. If you don't, and some cities do this, they have a franchised or a franchised area for commercial. And I think that that comes into play a lot in cities like New York, where they just have so much going on in tight spaces that anything they can do to have one hauler in that area, so it's not as much disruption of the different haulers, is what the intent is. So to me, it's just like what is a subscription area or ad hoc area, in the fact that you have haulers that may be operating right next to each other, instead of one hauler servicing the entire area via a franchise type agreement. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was trying to think, I was just at Waste Expo and I was in the conference with New York City and Los Angeles. They don't use organized and unorganized, so I'm just trying to understand where those terms came from. That's not a term that's familiar to the industry, I guess is all I'm saying, that I'm aware of.
That's kind of what I was always kind of understood it to be through SWANA.
Maybe we should ask who's the audience for this document. If it's Frankfurt and that's how they talk, fine. But if it's something where more lay type people are going to be reading it, we probably should sharpen our pencils and figure out a better way to say it.
Well, to me, this document is for citizens, the business, the solid waste management area. That's what I think that this has done. The state needs to just approve our plan. However, I would say that nobody else in the state is like us. I don't even think Lexington is like us. So I'm not sure that relying on their terminology would be the best way to go either.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and not to get hung up on this, I can move along right after this, but I share some of the same concerns that Sarah does, I think, around it being a little bit of a value statement with organized and unorganized. I threw something out in the chat, like contracted and individual subscription. Yeah, I think something along those lines might better portray what the systems actually are, to a layperson that doesn't know the ins and outs of all of the different possibilities that we have in our sort of hybrid merger system.
Without the risk of sounding pejorative.
Yeah, and like I said, I know we're sort of splitting hairs on a descriptor here rather than the content of the document. So I don't, like I said, I don't want to lean too far into that, but
Would we not continue to utilize the descriptions that we're going to add to residential contracted, organized and unorganized? The first item that we were going to edit were the descriptions to follow for those terms, organized and unorganized.
I think that's a good point. And let us work on those descriptors and definitions. And once we have set those, then I think we apply it to the document, the rest of the document.
You don't have to define it every time you use it after that.
Right.
Just so Sarah Lynn is not the only nitpicker, there's another principle in the middle of the paragraph.
Yeah, exactly. On the right.
Yes.
There are dozens of us, Sandra, dozens.
Not as good as Sandra and Sarah Lynn.
Thank you, Sandra.
You're welcome. You get the next one.
Fair enough. Got it.
Okay, so we'll work on that part of it. Any other questions about the commercial collection system? Okay.
One other
Resident-
minor, very minor language change there, where it says, sorry, you scrolled and I lost it there. There's the exception is small businesses in the urban services district that is collected by the Department of
I've
Public
already
Works.
marked that on my system, my markup.
Did
Thanks.
that fix
I
it?
promise to be less annoying going forward, Pete. Sorry.
You're good. Residential commercial bulky waste collection system. I struggled to really kind of pull this out, but I thought that it needed to be a little bit distinct because of the system that's the different ways that that's done. It's particularly in the urban services district where it's a periodic service versus a call-in type service. So I know that so that's why it's in there. And to me, it's mostly about the urban services district, but we are switching to an appointment style system instead of the periodic set out system. It's just a matter of getting the system in place before we do it. But any questions on what I've done here?
Well, I have a question in the next to last paragraph. It's also next to the last sentence. Just from a writing style, do you want to say in unincorporated areas and HOAs that chose or choose? Do you want to speak in terms of the future or the past?
Well, we're describing a current system.
Yeah, so then I
So-
think it's fine the way it is.
Just one slight correction I might mention, Pete. There are some HOAs and home rule cities where there are unlimited bulky collections. So it would be more than one item and no appointment. It's required to be collected on the collection day. We're trying to, as an industry, move those to appointments because, as you know, it's easier to schedule.
Yeah.
But right now, there are some existing contracts in the market that do allow for unlimited bulky collection, or three
Ours
items.
tends to be that way too.
So, Karen, let's go ahead and just make a note there instead of spending a lot of time changing it. Make a note there that that's something that we need to make a change on. We'll work on the language later. Litter baskets.
I think pedestrian foot traffic is probably redundant and you can pick one or the other.
Okay. Agreed. Anything else? Description of the drop-off system.
Never mind.
The only thing is you've got all the pickups being done in the final sentence by a private waste hauler or nearby company. Our city picks up, for example, in our parks and whatnot. So you might want to just expand that a little.
Is that in litter baskets?
Yes.
Okay.
I took me a second to find what you were saying.
I got a note of it. So
Okay.
Drop off system.
When we get to the household hazardous materials section or paragraph, I thought that we were also collecting once a month at the rotating or whatever you call it, special days. What do you call the ones where you collect amazing amounts of things?
Drop off.
Yeah, shouldn't that
We
be
are-
in here?
We are not utilizing that system to do household hazardous materials.
Okay, thank you. I
we-
thought you were.
It has been done before, and it's very difficult to do at a pop-up drop-off because it gets overwhelmed.
Yeah,
That was the whole
fair
purpose of us opening up the 5-day-a-week site to give more people access to it. But I think that is the kind of things that we try to get that information out there at those pop-up drop-off events. Is that's where you can go. Any other?
Just because I'm thinking about it. In Germany, you're not allowed to sell those things unless you take them back when they're finished. And boy, wouldn't it be nice if we did that?
Landfill, transfer station, recycling, composting drop-off? It's a whole lot. Education and outreach for collection system.
What page are we on? I fell behind.
Number 5.
Oh,
I think one thing that in here is latex paint. I think we have to have a note about the difficulty or the existing system for latex paint, because that is probably our number one call, people wanting to know what to do with latex paint. So we'll probably be
Habitat Restore ceased to take it.
Can I back up one section? Do we need to put I guess, an estimated term on how long the Vogt Avenue or what I call the Ralph Avenue construction demolition site still has available?
the
We're
second
getting a
to
lot
the
of
last
feedback,
paragraph
and it's
on that.
making it difficult to understand each other.
Now, there is an echo. It is difficult. So you're talking about the second to the last paragraph in the landfill, transfer station, recycling. We could, I think, but I think it's pretty variable. And in this grand scheme of a 5-year plan, I don't know how long it's going to be pertinent. Plus, I depending on how fast it's filling and if it's slowing down or speeding up, we only know. I think that what we could do is put on what the expected closure date is, not necessarily what it will be. Would that work?
I think it would better clarify the resources that we have currently available.
Okay.
The part about Recycle Coach, cloud-based system, I think it would be really helpful to make reference to that as an app or personal device application or something, because otherwise I think it's not going to be clear to folks.
I agree, Sarah Lynn. I marked that also.
Thank you.
So to recap your comment, you just want to say, sign up for um, an app called Recycle Coach. Is that your recommendation, Sarah?
No, I'm just where it says, it's the second paragraph, second sentence, and it says, and, oh, she's already fixed it. I think that what she did is just fine, other than a stickler would hyphenate smartphone because it's, no, I take it back. Never mind. Leave it alone. It's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, item 4 here, once again, brings up this issue of organized. So it's another spot where we're going to have to figure it out.
There was a question from Stacy in the chat. Is there anything in this document that mandates or changes restaurant choice for waste removal? And what I would say to that is that at this point, there isn't anything about moving forward part of doing something, doing nothing, or anything at this point. Our only purpose here is to get the as is and the strengths and weaknesses of the system. The action plans, which is actually in the document, is determined later on. So we just want to make sure that we're agreeing to what the as is our strengths and weaknesses, and then we work on anything that we want to do moving forward. Does that answer your question, Stacy?
I think so. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No problems.
I have a question on 4B on page 6. In the middle, it refers to these competitively bid exclusively contracted entities. It uses exclusive in the next sentence too. And I'm not confident that I know what that means, unless what it's saying is we're bidding for our neighbors and ourselves, but not the people in the next neighborhood or something, but it's just not clear what it means.
Okay, so what it's supposed to mean is that these are the portions of the solid waste management area that have decided to have their defined area, a small city or an HOA, under a service contract that's competitively bid. And it's exclusive to that individual hauler. So that goes back to that organized versus unorganized type of collection. So that's what it was supposed to be describing. Whether or not that does that adequately, maybe not.
Does
Yeah, I
franchise
don't think it
solve
would
it?
hurt. I'm sorry. I don't think it
No,
would
I-
hurt to say more because while we may in our city provide way more than the urban services district people are getting, there are other cities that are getting way less. And I'm not sure that the complexity of the issue is contained in what these words are.
Here's a suggestion that might help. Item 5, immediately below it, where it talks about citizens can choose blah, blah, blah. Maybe we ought to say citizens, homeowners associations, home rule cities can choose blah, blah, blah.
So you're saying put that in B?
Well, I'm not sure about that part yet, but I'd like to hear what Sandra thinks. But it does seem like you've begun to address it here, and it needs to be affiliated with the stuff up above in some form or fashion, I would think. But what do you think, Sandra?
I understand and I agree with what you've said. I'm not sure how to do it.
Fair enough. I mean, to me, it's a good place to put a footnote, except most people ignore footnotes.
Let us go back to work on it a little bit. And I may I may contact one of you guys offline to see if we're getting it to be more clear.
Can I go to item 6 now?
Absolutely.
I think the third sentence, for the citizen with an 18-gallon bin, I would put a comma maybe. This change significantly increases the number of materials, etc. I'm afraid that's the way it's worded. It could be interpreted to mean the 18 gallons more effective than the roll cart. You might say something like, for the citizen who previously used an 18-gallon bin, the larger container leads to, just to clarify what you're saying.
You want to make that change, Karen?
I forgot what you said at the beginning. Can you say that again?
The sentence that starts with, for the citizen with an 18-gallon bin, I think it's confusing. I would say for the citizen who previously had a 18-gallon bin, comma, the change to a roll cart or a larger roll cart, larger bin, whatever you want to call it, leads to significant increases. And this reminds me of something else. Up above, we talk about the commercial sector having dumpsters. And I would think it'd be a great place to put a sentence in there about they're required to keep the lid shut on the slight chance that somebody might read it and improve their behavior and reduce litter. Wishful thinking, perhaps, but why not?
Note of that. Okay, moving on.
We have 13 self-service sites now.
Yes.
That's good.
Looking to add more.
Cool.
So if everybody's good with the strengths of the system, do we have anything to add as a strength? Okay, going on to the weaknesses. And yes,
Sorry, but in here, we discussed earlier, I thought one of our strengths was the fact that we have multiple facilities available to us for both recycling and disposal of solid waste.
Mhm.
I'm not sure what you mean, Bruce.
Well, I don't know if it comes to play here or the strengths and weaknesses section that follows, but I see a strength of our community is the fact that we have, a large amount of capacity available for MSW disposal, as well as a large capacity available for recycling processing. I look at that as a strength in comparison to other peer cities that are referenced in the study.
Well, coincidentally, yesterday I was talking to a teacher who had taken students to the outer loop landfill. And we were, I was talking about how they're going to fill between the cells and take it up higher and all that, and to create much more life. And she said, but they told us it only has 50 more years left. That's not very much. And so it was interesting to me that a layperson like that would see 50 years as short, whereas it felt kind of long to me.
What's interesting about that was, it had 50 years when I was there 17 years ago.
Yes, exactly. Just like we always have 200 years of coal left, right? And the next technology in cars is 10 years away. It's always the case.
So to your comment, Bruce, I think that we discussed that. Where I put some of that information was actually in the as is. But I think that we can definitely make note of that in the strengths. So I got a note here to add our options for disposal of waste is strong here.
Not just disposal, but also recyclables.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you ask me what the strength is, that would be the first thing I would say, is that if you give a damn, you got lots of options to get things done here.
And sorry, just a question: is there not going to be a separate section that talks about disposal specifically as well, or strengths and weaknesses in disposal, or is that all going to be? Or are we talking about the system as a whole right now?
There is a third chapter that is related to disposal. Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's what I thought. Because I had some things I wanted to bring up when we got to that, but wanted to make sure that wasn't all being put into this section.
And I think that's a good point, Andy. I'm not sure that it really belongs here. It belongs in the plan, no doubt, but it may belong in the disposal system. I'm going to leave it right here, my note, to look at it, because I haven't even started on the disposal section yet. But as long as we're getting it into the right spot, it needs to be here. I think that's a good point.
I think that note, like Bruce's specific note, can potentially be used in both places, because if there's an issue at one of the disposal locations, then your collection system doesn't slow down and stop, having to take material an hour away or something like that. I mean, there are some other really truly disposal specific strengths and weaknesses, but I think it might make sense to have that in both.
From a collection point of view, I think the good point is that you have a lot of options to have your material taken away, and it might not be disposal necessarily, but yeah, putting it in both places, I do believe it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, for metro trucks, right, the ability to take something to the waste reduction center if they can't get into outer loop, or vice versa, is
Sure.
a collection benefit for the city.
Okay.
I think that the more direct comment would be that the hauling distance is relatively short, because if you have a relatively short hauling distance, it takes fewer trucks and staff to get the job done. That to me is very germane to the collection system per se.
Yeah, that's a very good point. If you've got a 50-mile trip someplace, you're gonna double the amount of trucks on the road.
Okay. Got that as a note.
So under strengths, could we justify bragging about our diversion rate, or is it not that exemplary when you take everything into account?
I think it's going to depend upon the sector, which I think is, and I'm not necessarily sure that it would belong in the collection system more than I think would be better for the disposal system or the recycling system.
Well, the reason why I think it does belong in collection is, as we noted up above, just merely switching people from 18-gallon to 60 increases the capture rate. And that if we make it easy for people, they recycle, and if we make it difficult, they don't. So that's why I think it is germane.
Okay, tell me again what should be added.
Well, I'm getting tired here and I'm probably being goofy, but I think that one of the strengths of the system is that we are trying to make it easy for people. And when you put it all together, we're trying to help people to do the right thing. And I think that's a strength. It's not like we don't care what they do. We put some pretty significant efforts into encouraging people to do the right thing and helping them to understand what that even is.
Okay.
So to me, it warrants a summary statement in this strengths list.
Okay, I got a note of that. Weaknesses,
One more
aside from the
strength.
organized, unorganized descriptors that we're going to work.
Pete, I'm going to back up on you one more time. With strengths, would it not be a strength that we have a vast network of haulers within the county area?
Is that in 5?
Yeah,
Is that
that's
number
kind of where
5,
I
or is that
thought it
separate,
was.
Bruce?
As long as it is in 5, then covered.
So are we in weaknesses yet?
No, not quite yet. Is that adequate, Bruce?
I believe that satisfies my
Okay,
concern.
now we're into weaknesses.
So under the very first item, there is an inset quote with a little a, and you're not supposed to have a little a unless you also have at least a little b, but more importantly, it's a quote and it's not clear to me where the quote came from, and so I think it should be clarified. Oh, you're saying it right above. So can we say something like who did the evaluation? Or when it was done to give it more context?
Yeah,
Is the A from the study? Is that why there's an
Don't-
A or no?
I'll be honest
Still
with you.
take it
I
out
don't.
in this,
I-
take it
I
out
don't
in this
know.
context. It just looks dumb here.
They just did it automatically. I'll just delete it. Okay, so did you
The
want,
actual quote is from page 7.3, section 7.1.4 in the solid waste management system evaluation that was done by MSW. It's
Give a
this,
date there, please, Brian.
I'm sorry.
A date, please.
Well, it was finished in February of 2018. So it was in the final study that was submitted to the city. That's where you got that from, didn't you, Pete?
Yes, sir.
I'd still just go ahead and put some citation there so that if somebody wants to review this themselves, they can.
I will say that particular paragraph in there, I have some objection to. And I would share with you the reason for that is that the specific comment in the study says that they're talking about a single provider, which I'm assuming was part of the right before the conclusions in section 7, Pete. And it says the collection program will be less expensive than an equally well-managed open collection system. Yet if you go to the high diversion cities in the study and you compare that to the Louisville costs, you will find that Louisville is currently much less expensive than the high diversion cities that are identified in the study. So I would disagree fundamentally with that comment.
I understand that what you're saying, but I don't know that you can compare necessarily costs from one city to the other because you can look at I mean solid waste is very local, but things
Well,
are just more expensive than other cities.
Just because some other city is higher than we are, doesn't mean that we can't cut costs from what
I'm
they are.
not sure what this quote accomplishes, because I think that there are components of all of it that from different perspectives are arguable. And I'm not sure what it's saying to the reader.
The purpose of that was that it's showing that the unorganized collection, subscription-based collection is just inefficient. It's not an indictment of any body, any hauler, or anything. It's just more efficient from a delivery of services thing. You know, it's going to be improved. If I'm a paper boy growing up and I have to walk 10 miles to service 50 households, and I have to skip every third one, I'm going to opt for the route that has, I have to walk a quarter of a mile and to do 50.
I don't dispute that. It's the quote. I don't see where, using Sarah Lynn's comments earlier about pedestrian and foot, you've already said the subscription-based isn't efficient. And I'm not convinced this quote needs to be in there.
If it doesn't need to be there, then we can surely take it out. And as long as it's, I guess I was taking another step to make it to where it's not just it's somebody else's word. It's coming from the study, is backs up the statement, is where I was going with it.
But if you're saying it's coming from the study and that backs it up, I get what you're saying in terms of more efficiency, in terms of routing, and you've got one truck collecting everything on a street, and efficiency in terms of, in terms of cost for the hauler. But when you're saying it's less expensive, are you saying it's less expensive to haulers or less expensive to residents? Because where it's pulling it from in the study is specifically talking about cost to residents. And it's then using peer cities and high diversion cities. So it's specifically talking about, it's basing its statement here on the cost of similar systems in other cities. So I mean, I get what you're saying, that things are going to cost different amounts in different areas. That's obviously true. But it's specifically stating it's less expensive in these other places to do it the way those cities are doing. These are the model cities that we want to mirror, and that is totally fine. But those cities are also not less expensive to residents. I mean, they might be less expensive to operate for companies, but they're not less expensive for residents.
Well, I would hope that it would be less expensive to both. If you
Well, we don't know that. This is somebody's opinion. And I don't think that we should have a quote in there. I agree with everybody that's kind of silly to have this quote. That's just an opinion as far as I'm concerned as well.
The problem here is that we never seem to be able to have a discussion about this very topic, which would impact 40% of our residents, without everybody getting really defensive. And when we have asked everybody to cough up their numbers so we can speak in facts, we get a lot of pushback and non-cooperation. So I bet you Pete put this quote in there to try to deal with some of the inevitable pushback. And so I'd like to know, members of the regulated body, are you okay with eliminating it and leaving the rest of it as it stands? Are you willing to acknowledge that we provide linear infrastructure more cost effectively to all involved when we have one person rather than 5 companies doing it? If you're not, this is a silly
How much
thing.
does it cost the city to pick up garbage?
That's not the question I asked, but the city will tell you the answer to the question, and most of the private sector won't, and therefore it makes it difficult to argue about it.
No, and I think we actually agree on that, Sarah Lynn. I think that's one of the issues that we're running into, and one of the issues about why it's difficult to discuss is we have, at least when we're not talking about contracts with municipalities, we are bound by antitrust regulation that the city is not. So we can discuss all of our municipal contracts because those are public record. We are not legally allowed to talk about the cost of open market subscription rates because of price fixing concerns. But that's one of the reasons why we're talking about comparison cities for similar services. I mean, the idea here is we want to increase diversion, we want to increase efficiency, we want to do all of these things. But I think at least where I'm coming from on this is not to try to say we shouldn't do these things, but just to understand that if you start talking about adding services, even if you only have one hauler or two haulers or three haulers, that does not necessarily mean that it is going to cost less. I mean, if you use the high diversion model cities, you're looking at, like Austin, Texas is at $49.50 a month. That's fine if that's where the residents of Louisville want to go with it. But I think we have to have that as part of the conversation all the way through the process, rather than saying this is what we want to do, and then at the end of the process saying we've agreed to all of these things, now let's introduce the cost factor.
Well,
If I could
part
for a
of this
second,
is, yeah,
if I could for just a second, I think the point that I'm not trying to necessarily compare one city to another or whatever. I'm just saying that the collection system, an unorganized collection system, is not efficient. I mean, if you took some of the other cities that have a higher cost than us and you suddenly unorganized them, the price would be much higher than what it is right now.
Yep.
So, I mean, you look at our own solid waste management area, you have home rule cities and HOAs that contract for a reason. It's cheaper. It's more efficient.
Okay, but you've said that. If you put a period after the word inefficient and take out the quote, you've said that.
Okay, and that's fine. I'm good with taking out the quote. And I think what Sarah Lynn said earlier was trying to defend a point is probably what I was trying to do there. As long as it's understood in my mind that, does anybody disagree with the concept of the organized versus the unorganized? Does anybody disagree with that part of it? I'm good with taking it out.
I think when you use a quote that doesn't come from a totally neutral external source, it probably doesn't have value.
with all due respect, though, I don't think there's any such thing.
I agree. I totally agree with you. And
I mean,
I
the
go
other
back
thing
to
I
the
want
fact
to
that that
add,
makes it redundant.
I want to add that there is no other type of infrastructure in a city in this country that isn't organized as what we call a natural monopoly. Gas, electric, sewer, water, cable. Always we do natural monopolies where we add extra regulations, but we let one entity do the job because it's so much more cost effective, with the exception of waste management in this community. So yeah, I don't think we should argue
No,
about it.
Sarah Lynn, you can add a lot of other things. I mean, I think there are a lot of people that would have issue with what you've said in the current market. I think those things may have been true in the past, but I'm not sure they're true today.
And I might even agree with you on some accounts, but I'm just saying that there's a reason how we went down this path on all other infrastructure, and it ought to have applied to this one.
Question, Pete.
Mhm.
Isn't this the system evaluation that we commissioned and paid for?
It is.
Yes.
And we now want to disown one of the statements in it?
I don't know if we're disowning it. I think that the point some are trying to make is that it doesn't need to be stated. It's already said.
Correct.
And
And just to reiterate that's where I was coming from, is mostly that I think it has the potential to be slightly misleading here. I agree that it's more efficient from a collection perspective. I just don't want somebody to read this and think that if we talk about all of the weaknesses, that then we have recommendations, that the expectation is that this is going to cost less than what people are paying now. Because I don't think that's the case for where this is gonna go if we start adding services in addition to trash and optional recycling.
I'm willing to take the bet.
Say again, Sarah Lynn?
I said, I'm willing to take that bet.
I would too.
Thank you.
So the point here, I guess, is leave it or take it out. What's the committee's thoughts on it? Do we need to have a vote, or I'm good either way?
I'm going to say that because we haven't cited it elsewhere, to my knowledge, we don't have to keep it. But if we're citing it elsewhere, then it's fine to keep it.
It is not cited anywhere else that I'm aware of
Okay.
at this point.
I think if you had the full citation, I would be in favor of keeping it, regardless of whether it's mentioned elsewhere.
I can go with that.
I still think it's redundant.
You don't think it's redundant?
I do think it is. We've said the words unorganized open market systems are inefficient. I would put a period there and take everything out until the quote, the final quote.
Well, it doesn't seem redundant to me, but I would remind you that we make a habit of being redundant for a number of good reasons.
You could argue it's a little more detailed.
And while another, just from a different point of view, something I just thought about, is our audience going to understand it without additional information? If we stopped at inefficient, would the average person understand what we're talking about?
So,
Yeah, I think I agree. It's, we make reference to it up above about as many as 5 companies going up and down the same streets. And maybe we need to make reference here. And the other thing I think we need to add is it's not just more efficient, but when you get complaints about littering or, if somebody drops a couple of bags of trash that fell out the back end of the truck, you can't tag anybody when 5 companies are operating there.
I agree that keeping the additional details in can help potentially readers understand it if we include the quote.
Is this something we want to take to a vote?
We still have a quorum?
I would hope so.
The reason I brought that up is if you all would read the study, sections 6 and 7, this is not accurate. It says that it's less expensive, and all of the study diversion cities are more expensive than Jefferson County. I'm just saying a fact. If you would go read
Doesn't
it.
make it inaccurate.
Well, that's where it's drawn from. It's referencing everything before and after it in the paragraph, Sarah Lynn. And I just don't think that is correct. It's not true. If you go I've read sections 6 and 7 3 times before a meeting. And as I read that, that's why I knew exactly where that paragraph came from. And if you read what comes before and after it, and you look at the high diversion cities, and you go look at the rates in the high diversion cities, they're much higher than Jefferson County.
That doesn't make this inaccurate.
But it's out of context. The context of
No.
that was it's inside of the high diversion city paragraph.
property values are more in those cities probably too. It doesn't have anything to do with the concept. This is a conceptual statement.
And I agree with Sarah Lynn in the fact that you're probably not comparing apples to apples from one city to the next. If you, the point here is the organized versus the unorganized. If you was to unorganize that collection in other cities, it would probably be much more expensive, but it's not necessarily an indictment of the unorganized collection system. It's just you're technically you're right. It is more expensive in other cities, but it's not because of the collection system.
No, but when you read this
Process suggestion.
paragraph and it has the words less expensive in it, and we're talking about a non-sophisticated reader who doesn't know all the terms of waste management, I tend to agree with Brian. I think that it's conveying something that isn't accurate in terms of what we're trying to say.
The introductory clause, strictly from an operational standpoint,
I
I
know.
think is very important context. And I think we all agree on the concept, right? But regardless, I think it's time, as a matter of practicality, it's time for people to nominate alternate language, and we'll look at it next time, maybe.
It's a good idea.
Well, the quote is from the study. It's not like we can change the quote.
Good argument.
Right.
That's why I recommended we take it out.
How about we take it out, but we clarify the concepts in the paragraph above it?
I would want to see the language, Caroline.
Agreed.
So
Or let's go back and try the straw vote maybe and see if we can figure out, do most people say leave it or most people say ditch it?
can I make a suggestion? Can we move forward through the rest of it and then come back to it just to make sure that we're understanding the full part of this before we make a decision on this one section?
Sure, that's okay.
I agree on that, yes.
So is there any other concerns from there? And I just lost my place. Sorry. Any other concerns about number 1 down below?
Nope.
One thing I would say, Pete, is the section below the quote, the paragraph below the quote, gives me a bit of concern because I'm a true believer that the competitive nature of collection in the unincorporated area does help to keep costs in check for the resident of Jefferson County. So I don't know how to change that paragraph or to recommend a change to that paragraph. But I do not believe it increases the cost per
Depends on what
household.
you're comparing it to. If you state what you're comparing it to, it might make more sense.
Well,
Well, the intent here is, number 1, I made sure that this was a strength to your point, Bruce, because I do believe the competition does help with the pricing. But it's not the collectors, it's the system that makes it to where you have it's just an inefficient system that obviously drives cost. If you had the same competitively bid, you can keep the competition in it and take out the unorganized collection part of it and probably do a little bit better.
Right.
I think that's the whole point of the paragraph. So it is a strength as the system is now. But it's also a weakness in that it could be improved.
Good point. Don't we have data from the same study that supports the second paragraph statement?
Yes.
And maybe we need to insert it. Because I don't think you made that up. And maybe we need to go ahead and put what examples we have.
I can do that. We'll take a look at that. Anything else in there?
Are we down to 2 yet?
I believe so.
I initially thought that number 1 underneath number 2 was kind of confusing, but I think if you inserted illicitly between non-participants and utilizing, it would be a little clearer.
It is definitely an issue.
Okay, there we go.
Probably something, and from let me preference this whole section. This is something that are all difficult to put numbers on, but from my seat as enforcement, these are the things that I deal with daily in a lot of cases. So many property owners that have dumpsters out there that are getting filled up by other people that maybe not that don't have services, or they're some of them do it. They have services, but they don't have enough services, or they just need to get rid of something and they're lazy. The increase to investigate these things is something that we're constantly going out to do because people don't have service and they're building up trash on their property. And those complaints that we get are usually coming from the next door neighbor. That is, they're tired of it. They don't want rats, or they've had rats and they're having to pay to get rid of rats. All this stuff is difficult to measure, but they're there. So I'm really interested in people's input on this part of it, because I do believe that most of these things are there, just difficult. So I'm going to shut up and listen.
Unless I happen to drive by.
You're right. Sarah Lynn caught an illegal dumper this past week.
And once again, they left their names all over everything. Dumbasses. Broad daylight, too.
Hey, Pete, this is Brandon. I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do the locations of the illegal dump sites that you all track overlay with the areas that don't receive service? Sort of my memory from just, illegal dumping enforcement cases that I read about in the Works Week, or that I remember from when we were, I was on the council, were cases that took place in West Louisville or other sort of properties where there was vacant and abandoned problems. And obviously that's within the urban services district, so they have service. So you're able to lay those two
Yeah, I
data
think
together and
think-
see that this is true?
I think by overlaying it as to where the dumping is taking place would not necessarily tell the whole story, though, Brandon. I think from our experience and even the contractor that was doing part of the study, the collection system, the junk collection system, is so abused by people bringing stuff in from other properties. And we capture a lot of the unscrupulous. This is not the majority or even close to the majority of the landlords and property maintenance companies out there, but they use our system to get rid of the stuff at all their other houses where they might not have the service. Plus, you have a whole group of people that they track where we are having our collection and dump it in front of it. There's no way that all of the material that is set out in our junk waste collection is set out by that property owner. I would say that a huge in our pilot area when we changed it, the amount of weight that we collected went down by about 75%.
Wow.
So I think it's difficult to really say by overlaying where illegal dumping occurs would be I don't think that that's going to work to tell us.
Makes sense. Thanks.
I mean, the guy that I caught last week, the job site was way out in the suburbs and he dumped it in 40208.
That is true. So no other comments about that section? Number 3.
Actually, there is one more, a Sarah Lynn and Sandra, in that you've got in number two,
Yep.
which is kind of interesting by itself. The
Yes.
sentence ends, when the non-participant places their waste. I would put an S on participants and take the S off of place.
Yeah. And I've also changed build up to accumulation because I think it's a little clearer. And I've
That is-
made and or with a slash in between them. And
Good.
cleanup needs to be 2 words in this context.
Thank you.
Number 3.
That's a big one.
Over the reason this is here is I think through the subcommittees and a lot of the work that we've done through working with the recycling facilities, listening to other places like the Recycling Partnership, I think we've identified that the messaging is complex, and we need to do a better job of it. I hope I've adequately described it, even down to a national system of the 1 through 7 resin. The symbol has made things confusing.
You might also add something here about the need to work in multiple languages nowadays. Adds to the complexity.
No other comments? Number 4.
I would just want to make this comment that this past Saturday, the Louisville Free Public Library had its 9th annual How-To Festival that was very well attended. I taught 2 sessions. It was a good audiences, very interested in learning and stuff. And maybe we ought to offer a how to recycle right or how to compost right next year, because the kind of people I just think are the kind of people who go home and tell their neighbors what they learned.
I did do the How To Festival in 2019. We weren't available because we had already committed to another event that day for this year,
Yeah.
but I do love that that program. It's great.
And this isn't a knock on our education team. We've kind of been pushed back a whole lot by COVID. And, you know, it's just, we do these things, but we haven't formalized it. I'm hoping that our marketing firm is going to help us design materials that will make this a little bit more of an official type thing that, you know, kind of binds under the whole guise of put waste in its place.
Should you mention that you've got the app, but? Because the app's pretty good at being site specific, I think.
Where would we, let me see. Thoughts on that, Karen?
Well, I feel like this is referring to a type of education that really can't be done just by an app, but I don't know.
I just don't want it to imply that you aren't doing any outreach. To see here in the second sentence where it says, while the Waste Management District currently will assist customers on a case-by-case basis, you're doing more than that.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
You
think-
are offering materials once a year, some years, that you send out in the mail or something, because I've gotten them.
I think
that
that the majority of when I read this, I think I was forgetting that it also includes residents right here. Because I think what we really need, yeah, there you go, Sarah
What
Lynn.
about this, you know?
Right, I think that when we talk about technical assistance, especially, we really want something for businesses and multifamily properties. And I mean, we always want to do more, but I think you're right. We do probably more for residents than the other two.
So maybe you should
Just
take
take out
residents
more
out of
residents,
this. Then it makes sense,
Just delete residents.
right?
I'm curious because when you go down to the bottom, it says how to obtain services. We don't do very well at talking to subscribers that are out there to purchase services and what services have to be offered and to let them know what their options are even to do things. And I don't think that we necessarily do a good job of that. We do get complaints that, you know, you hear it often, well, they don't offer recycling. You hear that quite a bit. So I think that there is a residential component here. I don't want to exclude.
Like I say, either way, but I think that you are doing more than what the way it originally reads.
Okay. Anything else? Awesome. So we went through a lot and we got a little bit of work to do, not nearly as much as what I thought that we would. But I really appreciate the comments and everybody working together on it. The next section that we'll be coming up with is going to be on the recycling system, which, you know, we'll get to work on that. But as we go forward, we're going to make sure that we get this one right, then we'll move on to that recycling side. And remember that this isn't the official comment periods that we have out here. The official comment periods when it goes out officially all the way to the public, and they can write and come in into a hearing and so on and so forth. So that's where we're heading. So let's just keep it in mind of what our purpose is here. So anybody have anything that in general we missed in the collection system?
Will you send out an edited version of what we discussed tonight to all the committee members or anyone who was on this call? Pete?
We can. Would you like us to make the edits before we do that? Or I think let us do that. Let us make some of the edits, and I know that there's some typos that we got to fix. Let us fix those, and then we'll get them out to everybody. Is that okay?
Let's do the edits and highlight the edits, and then somehow identify those areas that are yet to be decided and get it out to the committee members, please.
We can do so.
Any other comments from any committee member? Hearing none, do we have any public input from anyone wishing to be heard on the items pertaining to the agenda? All right. With that, the announcements, the next 109 board meeting is Wednesday, May 25th at 5:30 to 7 p.m. Next subcommittee meetings will be the residential and C&D Tuesday, June 14th from 2 to 3. And the ICI self-haul will be Wednesday, June 15th from 3:15 to 4:15 p.m. Our next advisory committee meeting will be Wednesday, June 15th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. I really appreciate everyone's input this evening. We are at 5:58 p.m. Any other comments from anyone on the call?
Thank you for herding us cats, Bruce.
Gotta get
Did
home to
we
mama.
mention the pop-up drop-off?
No, you did not.
We have one Saturday at U of L Shelby campus, 10 to 2. We've had some issues with our shredding truck. So it's going to be there for the first 2 hours or until it's full. So
Meaning
hopefully that
sometimes
goes
you're
over
filling
okay.
up the whole truck?
This particular company claims that they usually fill up within 2 hours, but they could only provide one and not 2 trucks. So, so we're kind of at the whim of what they can provide, and when it's full, it's full. So,
Document shredding has tended to be a little bit of a wild card when it comes to these events.
but it's very popular.
Yes, it is.
Everybody wants it. And I do have, sorry, I had sent out an email about the Rumpke Murph tour in Cincinnati. And for some reason off the top of my head, I cannot remember the date, but I would just want to remind everybody to let me know if you were going to go so that I can keep you on the list and make sure we have enough space.
I will say the most exciting thing, the most exciting change we've made in Cincinnati is the implementation of artificial intelligence and robotics in the material recovery facility.
How long do we think the tour will take?
June 29th. It starts at 9:30
Boy.
a.m., but we got to be in Cincinnati.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so yeah, I have a few people on the list that have already emailed me, and I'm keeping that track. But if you have not responded or think now you can or something like that, just let me know.
All right. Well, I thank all of you for your participation this afternoon. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Sarah Lynn. Do I have a second?
Second, Craig.
Second by Greg. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you all very much.
Thanks,
Have a safe
everyone.
Bye,
evening.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.